Before we start the podcast, a quick advert for the Cycle Touring Photo Competition 2020, which returns. All you need to do is send your best cycle touring photograph or photographs from 2019 to office@cyclingeurope.org for a chance to win some great Cicerone cycling guides. Remember that your photo must include your bike, have been taken in 2019 and reaches by midday on May the 31st, 2020. First prize is 3 Cicerone cycling guides, second prize is 2 cycling guides, and third prize is 1 cycling guide. So send your entries to office@cyclingeurope.org by May 31st. Full competition rules are at cyclingeurope.org/competition. Good luck. On with the show. Door locked, gloves on, sunglasses on, Strava started, and ready to go on my local permitted cycle ride. Here we go. Welcome to episode 17 of the Cycling Europe podcast. Today is Tuesday the 21st of April, and we're now well into the second month of the national or even global lockdown. But that doesn't stop us getting on our bikes, not here in the UK anyway, and cycling off on a local ride at least. And that's what I've been doing several times each week over the last few weeks in my little corner of West Yorkshire. And those sounds you heard at the beginning were me doing just that, heading out of the door, off on a 20-kilometre ride. And it's been a bit of a revelation because I've discovered several new routes within just a few kilometres of my front door, and I've also been exploring a bit further up the valley where I live. And today you find me now at this point in my script it says place and description, because I was planning on recording this somewhere up in the valley, looking out over the reservoir, lots of trees, blue sky. Unfortunately, the reason why I'm back home is because it's blowing an absolute hoolie, and it's very, very windy, and I couldn't find a spot which didn't sound as though I was sitting in a wind tunnel. Anyway, so I am back home now, and I'm just going to continue. Anyway, in a few moments, we're going to be listening to an interview I recorded a few days ago with 3 long-distance cyclists from Wales. But before we do that, a quick mention for this year's Cycle Touring Festival, which normally takes place in Clitheroe in Lancashire at the end of May. But for fairly obvious reasons, this has now been cancelled. However, all is not lost. Laura and Tim, who organised the festival, have decided to host a virtual event instead, and it's going to take place this weekend on Saturday the 25th and Sunday the 26th of April. Now, if you're listening to this podcast before the 25th and 26th and are interested in taking part in the festival, head to cycletouringfestival.co.uk, where you can register for the individual events, which include live talks, pre-recorded content and online Q&As. You do need to register for many of the events, but everything is 100% free. That said, Tim and Laura are encouraging people to make a donation to the National Emergencies Trust Coronavirus Appeal if you possibly can. The live events include talks about travelling in Greenland, cycling the Transpennine Trail, and cycle touring on various islands here and there, to name but 3, and include contributions from Kate Rolls, Stephen Fabes, who appeared on the podcast a while ago, Rob Ainsley, Duncan Dollymore of Cycling UK, I think, Anna Hughes, who's also been on the podcast recently, Tim Moss, who's also been on the podcast, and Jenny Graham and Lee Craigie of the Adventure Syndicate. I'll also be giving a talk, a live webinar at 4 p.m. on Saturday, talking about my trip to Spain and Portugal last summer. But you do need to register, so don't forget to visit www.cycletouringfestival.co.uk before Saturday. If you're listening to this after the 26th of April, you'll still be able to take part in the festival, as much of what goes on will be recorded and available on the website forevermore. The festival will return, hopefully, to normal in Clitheroe next year and take place over the weekend of the 28th to the 31st of May 2021. So that's all to come. Now, back to the Welsh cyclists. Last week I spoke to Geraint Rowlands, Owen Peak and Gareth Cadwaladr about their long European cycle that started in Holyhead in Anglesey in Wales and finished in Finland. They started the tour back in 2007 and arrived in Finland in 2019, 12 years later. As you can see, this is a cycle touring adventure with a bit of a twist. If you could all introduce yourself, and Geraint, if you could kick us off.
Hi, I'm Geraint. I'm one of the original two that set up this whole trip. It's kind of spiraled since then, and we've amalgamated a few people to come along with us as well.
Hi, my name's Owen. I joined in 2011 and last 9 years.
Hi, I'm a relative newcomer to this. My name is Gareth and I started back in 2015.
Okay, right, thanks for that. Now, this is all pretty complicated because you're all in different places in Wales, and I'm obviously up in West Yorkshire, but we'll try and make sure it's clear who's talking, which might not be that easy. Right, Geraint, you're one of the original people, so could you perhaps explain how this whole endeavour started way back in, I think it was 2007?
It was a little bit random, I've got to be honest. I was having a good few beers with a friend of mine, Gareth King. We originally met in A-level college, probably back in the year 2000. We were at a music festival up in North Wales. I'd recently had my bike stolen, unfortunately. I was buying quite a roady hybrid at the time. He was a big kind of mountain biker who just bought a road bike as well, a good old Specialized Alley. And we kind of thought, well, let's put a ride in somewhere in the calendar, as you do over a few beers. And that's what we did. We rode from his house up towards Dolgellau, so Swansea to Dolgellau, about 100 miles. I didn't quite make it. I didn't have the legs in those days. But yeah, off the back of that ride then, we kind of caught the bug and thought, right, let's do something weird and wonderful. So we drove up to Holyhead on a Friday night, which is right at the top of Anglesey, the little island at the top of Wales there. And we rode 220 miles down to Cardiff, right down to Cardiff Bay, over 2 days. So that was the very beginning, really.
When you did that original ride, did you, from Holyhead down to Cardiff, did you have any idea that it would spiral and it would continue year in, year out?
Absolutely none whatsoever. It was just a bit of a mini adventure, a little weekend that we thought we'd put a ride in together. We were totally unprepared, had absolutely the wrong kit with us, ate unbelievably the wrong food. I remember, because it was a weekend ride, we stopped for Sunday lunch with the Brecon Beacons ahead of us, filled ourselves up with a full roast dinner, and then plodded up the Brecon Beacons. So yeah, it wasn't exactly well planned or well executed, but we got there, and we certainly got the bug after it.
So what made you think the following year, right, what we'll do is we're going to continue this and we're going to kind of head out onto the continent and continue the ride from there?
We just got the bug, to be honest. We were both really into cycling. I was trying to get my fitness back, and we just thought, right, let's book a week. And it was that kind of time, iPhones were just coming into their own with maps and stuff like that. So it was a lot easier to kind of book flights and things like that. EasyJet really was kicking off. And suddenly the world was your oyster. I liked the sound of Paris-Nice. I'd always been into the Tour de France growing up as a kid with Channel 4 highlights late at night. Paris-Nice had a ring to it. Gareth had never been to Monte Carlo, so we added an extra 20 miles on the end to do Paris to Monte Carlo, and that's what we did. We flew into Paris and headed off down the race for the sun, they call it, isn't it? So, yeah, headed off straight line, effectively, skirted around the Alps as best we could, through the Rhone Valley, which was absolutely stunning. We had the Mistral behind us, which was, high, strong winds down in the south of France there. Nice bit of tailwind. And it was a fantastic week. And that week really did kick off the whole plan of, all right, let's try and get a good few of these rides in where possible.
At this stage, it was still just you and Gareth King, and you'd started from Paris. You hadn't started from Cardiff. So I'm guessing that you still hadn't necessarily come up with the idea of continuing every year and just starting off from where you'd finished the previous year. That was still an idea that had yet to come, is that right?
Definitely. It was totally unplanned. It's not like we woke up one morning and thought, let's cycle around Europe. This kind of patched together a little quilt, really, of ideas here and there. So we'd done the length of Wales, Holyhead to Cardiff, and we'd done Paris to Monte Carlo. So now there was a gap in between the two. And suddenly we thought, that'd be quite cool to fill that gap. So we've got a little line now from Holyhead all the way down to Monte Carlo, 2 ports at the opposite scale of the wealth scale, I would suggest. And that little concept kind of grew from one thing to another. So, yeah, the following year we did Cardiff to Paris, filled that gap. We cycled down to Portsmouth, got the overnight ferry to Le Havre, and rode into Paris and then flew home. And then a couple of years later, we kind of extended the line Monte Carlo to Rome. And that's where we started, kind of invited a few friends along. Grew from 2 to 4 at that point.
Okay, so pause there. So far, you've done Holyhead to Cardiff in the first year. Then you did Paris, Monte Carlo. And in that third year, or 2010, you went back and filled the gap in between. So you've done Cardiff to Paris. So you've now, in effect, done Holyhead down to the south of France. You were still only 2 people. There was still only Gareth and Geraint doing this. That's Gareth King and Geraint, you. What made you think, right, hang on a second, we could just keep doing this and let's involve other people? Why not just keep it the 2 of you?
That's a good question. Again, I don't know, really. We were really enjoying it. It was great. It was a real challenge between 2 guys, and I think we worked quite well together. I think when there's 2 of you, there's always one who's knackered and one who's really bubbly. So you kind of chippy each other along a lot. Why add 2 more? I don't know. I thought we were having such a good time, and it still wasn't the idea of let's cycle around Europe. It was, kind of we've got this line, let's maybe extend it a bit and see where it goes. And let's expand it to give other guys a chance to enjoy what we do. Again, Kev and Andy they joined us for the Monte Carlo to Rome ride. They'd had new bikes. They were getting into the whole cycling scene. So it was, right, let's give them a bit of something to work to, a target.
Sorry to interject. I don't know how right I am, but I think one of the things I've experienced is that, we've all kind of come home after being to these places and you've tried kind of just detailing how beautiful some of the places are or the things you've experienced. And you're effervescing about these places, but you're still just met with a little bit of a blank face. It doesn't translate well as the story told. And, the ability to fully comprehend the experience is why you'd always want to invite people on board just so they can see it for themselves a little bit.
I think that's an interesting point. The fact that, you do come back and you think, well, what people really need to do is go and experience it themselves. So that was perhaps an incentive. But just to go back a second, in 2011, you had a team of 10 people, is that right? And you did Holyhead to Cardiff again.
Yeah, this was something very different, really. We'd lost a close friend of ours, Gethin, to lymphoma. And at the time, we kind of thought, well, we wanted to do something that was open to a lot of guys who knew Gethin, as well as others. And we wanted to raise some money for lymphoma research. So it had to be something close to home. So Holyhead to Cardiff fitted the bill. And it had to be a challenge. You know, it really had to be something different that we would raise a lot of money doing. And we rode Holyhead to Cardiff in 24 hours. The challenge was 24 hours. The time we took was 23 hours and 5 minutes. A lot of people have done it a lot quicker than us. But as a team of, you know, we're not even club riders, really. We got a lot of people on board and raised a good amount of money there. And it was a nice thing to do, to be honest.
As perspective, we had somebody show up with a bike they'd bought 2 weeks beforehand, riding in jeans. And fair play, he still did the full 220 miles.
That's an impressive feat, especially with a pair of jeans on. So you did that in 2011, and there are 2 extra people who joined you, Geraint, and Gareth King. That was Andy and Kev in 2012. Were Andy and Kev part of that group of 10 people who'd done the 24-hour thing in Wales?
Yes, they were. Again, Kev's a close friend from college. Andy's a friend of mine from university. So Andy hails from Norwich originally. Kev's one of the North Wales lads. So we're starting to throw the net a bit wider here and collect a few different people into the group. So I think that's certainly added stuff as well. So, you know, it's not just a group of us from North Wales doing it. It is quite a wide collection of lads by now from all over. Dave, who came later in he's from Sheffield. So yeah, there's quite a collection. So it brings something every year, I think.
So you're now in 2012. You're doing Monte Carlo to Rome, and again, I'm going to ask the question I asked a few minutes ago. Had you yet decided that this was going to continue year after year after year, and that you were going to just extend it every year and keep going around Europe? Had that idea come into your head yet?
I think the first part of that we were fairly keen on, riding year after year after year. Where that would take us was probably still an unknown. So we were heading now, we thought, right, we're in Monte Carlo, Rome's a beautiful city, it's probably about a week away, let's give that a go. So that took us down to Rome. The concept of let's do every European country, that probably came the following year, I think. At the point in 2012, I think we were just kind of picking somewhere to ride to, really. It really was that simple. There's no grand plan, like I said, when we set out. It became what it is over a good few years.
I remember a discussion you had when you got to Slovenia, whether you were to go down towards Greece, and that was in 2014, or go up and across. So it wasn't until 2014 really that the decision was made, I don't think, Geraint.
Yeah, I think you're right. That Slovenia, Italy area there was probably where we made that call.
Owen.
Hello.
Hi, you got on board for the first time in 2013 on the Rome to Slovenia trip. Had you done the 24-hour thing back in Wales?
Yeah. You know, I'm part of that wider net where my attachment to the guys is quite tenuous. I didn't know any of them really. I got wind of the 24-hour ride via a mutual friend, and I just started cycling. It sounded wildly difficult, but I thought I'd have a crack anyway. And I got my invite to join the guys then for the European side of things in Rome. So that's the point where I think, you know, I guess the idea of maybe making it something more probably started to fester, if you like, at that point, because until then you're pretty much heading in a straight line south. The minute we kind of turned back up north towards Slovenia, it was, I guess, starting to, the question was begging, where are we going to end up? You know, what is the finish line for all of this? And I think, like Gareth said, that the idea forms then that if at Slovenia you just keep heading east or north, you're going to miss out all of the Balkan countries. And it kind of feels like boxes that you haven't ticked at that point, having been, through that route. So it was a south then from Slovenia onwards.
So you've been involved, Owen, since 2013, and
Yeah.
the route has then headed off down, as you say, through the Balkans, Croatia, down to Albania, right down to Greece, and then you kind of doubled back and headed back up north through Eastern Europe. Just tell us about the amount of planning that you do. Do you know exactly where you're going to be on each day? Do you have all the hotels booked? Do you have a van to carry all your stuff, or is it unsupported?
We do have a good plan laid out. We know roughly what we're capable, and it's definitely been a learning curve over the years. And the fact that every mistake made has resulted in a change of tactic the following year. But we know what we're capable of over what terrain. So you're kind of finding towns on the maps roughly a good distance apart that you're capable of on any given terrain. Booking ahead. There's no support vehicles on any of the years. It's fly out with your bike disassembled in a box. All the usual kind of budget airlines. Usually some quite odd looks then at the side of the airport as you're reassembling your bike and trying to dispose of the cardboard somewhere. And then, just set off heading for your first hotel that night. I think planning wise, it's definitely changed since the introduction of Google Street View and things like that. It's a lot easier and it's achievable. It's something anybody can do. You can just kind of find your way through a route on any given country.
Do you travel quite light? Do you carry much equipment with you, or just the bare basics?
It's been an experiment year on year. I think the first year I went out in Italy, everybody had this idea of pushing out the daily distances, and everybody's packing super light, carrying barely anything. We're literally carrying, you'd comfortably fit in a briefcase for the entire week. We're not the freshest smelling group of guys by the end of it. And what you find is that you're possibly touring with a trade-off between comfort and weight. And I think, like a lot of cyclists, you hit a phase where you're a bit of a weight weenie and you're fixating on everything and anything. And over the years, the one biggest change, I guess, is the kit that we carry. And I think everybody now has started to move across to panniers and just, being able to live a bit more achievably. You can huff up a big climb with an extra few kilos if you need to, if it means you don't, feel like your back is breaking 2 days in and you're not capable of carrying on. And I'd couple that as well to things like spares and tools and whatnot. We've had way too many mishaps really to not learned.
Gareth, you have been involved more recently. What was the first year you were involved? And again, how did you join the group?
I've known Geraint and Gareth King I've known Gareth King since school and Geraint since tertiary college. I was a bit jealous upon hearing the stories, but I was a bit late getting into the cycling myself. I didn't start cycling till about 2013, 2014. Hearing about all these places and all these random stories of all these encounters and these, beautiful places, and I wanted a piece of that myself. So I started 2015. So carrying on from Bosnia down through the Balkans to Greece was my first year, and it was a tough old ride, to be honest with you. I hadn't ridden further than 40 miles in one go up until about a month before I went. So to do, I think the first day out there was about 85 miles up some horrific climbs. It was a tough old, and it was my birthday as well, I think, if I remember.
There was 10,000 feet of height gain that day as well. I remember that day. It was a bit of a killer up to a couple of ski resorts, or what used to be ski resorts in Bosnia.
So Gareth, you were joining the group as a relatively new cyclist. You were you were the seventh person joining a group of 6 people who'd presumably already been doing this for a couple of years. Was it also, apart from the cycling, was it a challenge to get involved and be part of the group as well?
Emotionally part of the group, I don't think so. I mean, I knew Geraint, Gareth, Kevin very well anyway. I'd met Owen a few times. I'd met Dave once, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, they're a really easy bunch of lads to get on with. And I knew, my good friends would get on with them, that I'd get on with them as well. So that wasn't hard. I mean, the hardest thing was the fact I was a relatively newcomer to cycling. Was I didn't want to let anyone down. I didn't want to be the slow guy that was holding everyone up. You know what I mean? I found that quite tough, and I was pushing myself quite a bit really in that one.
But you must have presumably felt comfortable at the end of that week, because you came back for the next year and the year after. You must have held your own.
I'm not sure about holding my own, but I certainly enjoyed it, and it was quite emotional, I'll be perfectly honest with you, finishing in Greece on the first day. I actually felt like I'd achieved something rather than a little hike around Snowdonia on my bike. You can map, you can see it on a globe, you can, see the line, and yeah, from then on I was hooked, really.
If you've got, cycle touring or any kind of distance cycling as a spectrum with, achievement at one end and enjoyment at the other, all of us occupy a different position on that spectrum, whether it's, a huge achievement or so big an achievement that you're stripping all the fun out of it. But, that's the one thing I think we've all managed to maintain, is the fact that how big an achievement it's been for each of us, or any of us, has been, relative to the year and the terrain and the distance. But I don't think we've ever managed to really lose that enjoyment for each other's company. And, you've got that shared interest in cycling that means, on mile 112 of a given day and 10 hours in the saddle and, looking round in the back end to be on for somewhere to get water or food, you're still able to risk a dangerous joke at someone's expense and know that they're going to take it relatively well.
Yeah, not always.
So we're now in 2016 and you've arrived in Greece. Now, I'll just quickly tell anybody who's listening where you went from here. So you were in Thessalonica, you went back in 2016, you headed for Hungary, and then 2017 Hungary to Poland, 2018 Poland to Lithuania, and then in 2019 Lithuania, finishing in a place called Lappeenranta in Finland. So how many countries have you actually visited so far, and how many kilometres in total since, well, not everybody, but since those two people left Holyhead?
We're looking at 28 countries in total so far, with 6,000 miles, so that's best part of 10,000 kilometres. Over the years, there's we have seen some quite amazing things. Going back to where Gareth joined us in Bosnia, the reason we went to Bosnia that year, because we'd had to chop the previous years short slightly. We found ourselves on the top of a mountain in Bosnia, absolutely hurling it down with rain, some of the worst conditions the Balkans had seen for years. We managed to negotiate some road workmen to put us in the back of a flatbed truck, which then took us down the mountain through what was effectively a minefield, and they were actively clearing the mines while we were there. So that was a fairly hairy one. Heading down then towards places like Albania and Macedonia, and really seeing a shift in culture. If you do something like London to Paris, or rides in Spain, a lot of guys go down to the islands in Spain for weekends or wherever. It's very still Western culture, but when you get out to places like Albania, it's a different world. It really is a real big eye opener. So that was the first part of Europe where things were different. Things really were different. Heading up then kind of Bulgaria that way, again, different culture altogether again. We've seen, if you look at our route, heading down to Greece and then heading effectively Greece to Russia and everything in between, the shifts of peoples and mindsets and, even the little things, but moving away from Western culture just makes it really interesting and really exciting to go back year after year.
So if we went round each of you and I asked what would be your highlight of the rides that you've been involved in, could you just pick out one or two things which for you personally is a highlight? Perhaps we can start with Owen.
Okay. I mean, we're all going to be fighting over possibly similar things, but I think day two, I think, after Gareth joined us, and we just crossed the border out of Dubrovnik in Croatia over into Kotor Bay. I think all of us just kind of stopped a little bit just to kind of breathe in the scene. You know, it's Europe's most southerly fjord, crystal blue waters. You know, absolutely mirror flat calm. You know, stunning high mountains on all sides, and it just was a breathtaking place. And I know that's something every single one of us would pick, the climb out of there, but for me, just for the sheer, you know, kind of, I don't know whether it was a highlight, but just something that you just don't experience. We rode in Belarus a couple of years ago, between two towns on an old Soviet road, a 73-mile straight, and it's something you're just never ever going to experience in the UK or probably anywhere in Western Europe. You know, there's always something to go around, a mountain or whatever, but 73 miles in a straight line through forestry. It's not a test necessarily of your cycling endurance, but psychologically, where there's just no change, nothing. Just it's literally the scenery's like a Scooby-Doo cartoon, where everything is just the same. You know, mile after mile after mile. It's fascinating, if nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly agree with you on when it comes to the Bay of Kotor. I went up there when I was cycling along the Mediterranean in 2013, and that is beautiful. Did you go all the way around the lake, or did you take that little ferry across the mouth?
We came through the mouth of it on the Leptane ferry. We were riding to Podgorica that day, so we rode round the eastern side of the bay and up into Kotor, and then up the mountain. You know, it's a monumental climb up there out of Kotor and up over, whereas, you know, you skirt around the bay and head down the coast towards Bar. That was actually our plan, but we had it in the backs of our heads setting off that day that we might, you know, make a change of plan just to take in that climb, seeing how we felt. And maybe not everybody was, you know, at the bottom of a climb, you never really know how epic it's going to be. It's always a lot nicer at the top than it is at the bottom. So maybe not everybody was super keen to take it on. But, you know, the view was something we just kind of had to do. And yeah, so we changed plan last minute after a bit of a discussion at lunch. And instead of heading down the coast, we opted to go up the climb and over the mountains and over to Podgorica there.
Well, hopefully that lunch wasn't roast beef and whatever you had back in Wales. Right, Gareth, what's the highlight for you, or highlights perhaps for you?
Obviously, I'm going to have to give Kotor Bay a shout. It was just absolutely bonkers. I've got another couple from that same year. I think the first year I went, I'm not sure if I'm getting a bit more jaded or whatever after being on a few trips, but it was the shocking culture cycling through Skoda, a town in Albania, where it was, you know, it was like Michael Palin going around all these places where it's just a hubbub of people and cars and bikes and markets at the side of the road, and the roundabouts there are just something to behold. I think it was just pick a line and just try your best to make it through, really. So that's got to be up there. And another highlight looking back, although it wasn't at the time, it was quite scary, really. But it always does bring a laugh when I think back when it was when Geraint and I were going through a little mountain pass in Greece on the end of that year, Geraint, and we were at the back of the pack going up the hill, and some wild dogs decided to come out the woods and start chasing us, which was quite scary at the time, especially when you're tired and, you know, 35-degree heat, you're sweating, you're doing whatever you can, and yeah, and you get that awkward laugh that you only do when you think you're going to die, of just this unnerving cackle that you're not sure what's going to happen. But looking back, yeah, it always does bring a smile to my face, but at the time it was quite terrifying.
The fastest times I've been on a bike is when I've been either chased by a wild animal, a dog, or I remember being chased by a large bird in northern Norway, which and I don't think I've ever cycled so fast in my life. Geraint, how about you've obviously been involved right from the beginning. So what would be the highlight for you?
There's so many. I'm not sure highlight is the right word, but memories, talking to people, the people you meet and the conversations you have. There's a bunch of, by now there's 10 of us, so there's 10 guys in Lycra turn up in a random village in, I don't know, let's say Ukraine somewhere, and people come out and people talk to you, and people are kind of asking where are you from, where are you going, what are you doing, the strange looks you get, the random conversations, talking to people. I remember talking to a chap in Albania about, the vast majority of cars in Albania were 1970s, early 80s Mercedes. He was saying that, all the kind of cars have been bought by people in Germany when they're brand new and passed down throughout the Balkans. As the cars get older, they kind of get traded down, and then they end up in Albania, where people keep them alive for another 10, 15 years. So, little conversations like that, and those are probably the highlights for me. Places we've seen, highlights the wrong word, but, we've also been to some fairly horrific and memorable places. We've ridden past Auschwitz, for example, as well as some of the, I don't know if you're aware. Sorry, guys.
BBC News moment.
Yeah, the young man just broke into the room.
I think it's weird that you ask about the highlights, and the odd thing is all of us are kind of thinking back to the highlights being the scenery, and then immediately jumping back to the stuff that we all found quite hard at the time. And that day in the Balkan flooding, there were landslides, people dying in the villages. We were heading out there with predicted temperatures for that time of year being 20 to 24 degrees. So we all pack accordingly and travel short sleeves with a little bit, leg warmers. And all of a sudden, we're 5 miles up a mountain pass. It's -1, and the road just stops. There is no more road. You're just stuck in the middle of a field somewhere and desperately pleading with the people who speak no English, and obviously, our Slavic isn't too hot, but it's just that thing of the people. You're pleading for people's help and support to dig you out of a problem when the country itself is struggling with the weather and whatnot. And yeah, we just that year it just collapsed into an absolute panic to try and get through, in the fact that roads were being washed away. We were wildly out of our depth. One of the guys that year, he still struggles with feeling on one hand as a result of the cold. And all we did realistically was that year we didn't manage to effectively complete our journey. We just ended up pleading, begging and borrowing with the locals to see if anybody had a van that could get us to a location, and it was just a series of people in Bosnia just pulling us off hillsides and saving us. And despite the fact that the circumstances were awful, like I said, people lost their lives, but it's still testament in that, that kind of crucible or that environment, the people were still willing to bail us out and help. It's a very maybe it's a slightly a lofty view of things, but it's still a fantastic thing that you get to meet people. And I think the one thing over the years and the miles is that you do get a feeling as you travel that people on the whole generally are pretty good. It gives you a bit of a life-affirming thing.
I'll second that, due to the random toy shop owner in Bulgaria who had a crank in the boot of his car. I managed to cross-thread my crank on the bike when I was putting it on. And it went fine for a couple of days until it just came off randomly in the middle of a Bulgarian town, and we had fun trying and put it on with an axe, Geraint, at one point.
Yeah, we weren't carrying crank tools or anything, and it wasn't quite the right size, but we got to borrow an axe and managed to get the old one off and a new one on. It was one of the more bizarre stories.
That must have been an interesting conversation, trying to borrow somebody's axe. But I think it's a bit of a cliche sometimes to say that people in this country or that country are very nice. I think it's probably better to say that when push comes to shove, most people in most countries are actually quite nice people, and people will help you out. You know, if you approach them, if you ask them, if you engage with them, you do tend to meet nice people, because most people are actually quite nice people. A couple more questions. Have you ever considered kind of going to the next level and camping?
Myself and Geraint have done a bit of a trial run last year on that, actually, as a weekend mission, just bike parking. You know, it's becoming very much the flavour at the minute and in vogue. But the consideration of that, but I think the camping, I think, is something that I definitely would do for a weekend. But at the end of a week long ride, you know, you're running the gambit then of picking up, you know, infections and stuff like that, not being able to keep yourself clean enough, not being able to wash your kit enough. So, you know, admittedly, some of the hotels we've stayed in would be risking prosecution for calling themselves hotels. So we have roughed it to an extent, even staying with the hotels. But I think camping for a weekend would work for us. But camping for a week without access to, you know, good facilities. And I'm not talking about luxury. I'm just talking about the ability to just dunk your kit in a sink or you know, something like that. I'm not sure whether camping would fit our needs, plus carrying a tent as well.
The other question I was going to ask is, isn't there a tendency at the end of kind of a long day in the saddle, when you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 men, being a bit sexist perhaps, just to kind of hit the bar in the evening and get absolutely hammered every night?
No, not at all.
Your Honour.
I was waiting for someone else to answer that one.
There is a social side to it. I'm not going to beat around the bush. That's part of it. I think we do work hard all day. You're on the bike. We're usually rolling out at 7 a.m, 7:30. Could even be earlier if we've got something, you know, a ferry to catch or something, you know, over a random river. And then we kind of reach the hotels maybe 5:30 in the evening, having, you know, hit anything between 100 and 120 miles in that day. So we've worked hard. We get to the hotel, we, you know, jump in the shower, get our kind of t-shirt and polo shirt, which is pretty much all we carry, pair of flip-flops, and we'll seek out food wherever we can find it, to be honest. Land like a plague of locusts on the local pizzeria place, and then have a couple of beers. It works quite well. You haven't got too much time, I'll be honest. By the time 8 chaps have washed their kit ready for the next day, found food, got their bearings, got kit ready for the next day, maybe sourced some breakfast, because there's no shops open at 7 a.m, so we tend to stock up the night before. By the time you've done all that, you're not really going to get too much drinking time in, really. But we squeeze in a couple of beers and make sure of that.
Well, you make it sound a bit like a Tour de France racing team, but I'm sure you're not that clean living for the course of your week. Have any women ever expressed an interest in doing it with you?
No, to be honest. Nobody's kind of thrown their hat in the ring, to be honest. I don't know whether it would impact the team at all. Like, I think it's already been mentioned, we don't mind saying it as it is, and I don't know whether, as gentlemen as we are, we would shy away from doing that with the gender question thrown in. I don't know. That would be an interesting one. It's not a closed door by any means. Yeah, could be an interesting one for future years.
Yeah, the problem we've got obviously sometimes is we hole up in some, you know, 4 of us I've shared double beds with many of the boys and everything, and the question does come then when you get a female coming along whether that's appropriate, I suppose.
I mean, we're coming across here slightly Puritan. I mean, it's a question of what everybody's comfortable with. So, like I said, as Gareth said, we've had to share beds and all sorts. And yeah, I mean, I personally, my outlook on it would be, well, look, this is the situation. This is how we travel. This is how, and I'd be more than happy to make accommodations and do whatever's necessary to put someone at ease, make somebody comfortable, but I wouldn't necessarily get to the point where we're changing the entire structure of the trip to accommodate somebody, and that would be true whatever their gender was. So yeah, it's a case of there's not exactly a surfeit of guys looking to join us either. So it's it's one of those ones where, as Guy says, it'd be interesting. I'd like to see. Obviously we're a broad church. All comers are welcome. It's just a case of, as you say, we don't smell great necessarily over the time. And as I said initially, it's been a learning curve over the years where our kit requirements have maybe become a little bit more accommodating. First year I went, I was literally traveling in cycling kit with a pair of shorts and a t-shirt for the evening, get into wherever we're staying, taking my kit off, washing it in the sink, putting my evening kit on, going out, and just copy and repeat day after day after day after day. Well, washing your cycling kit in a cold sink 6 days straight, washing is, again, a little bit of a loose term, isn't it? And, we're all pretty rank and not so fresh by the end of the week. And even though we've made measures to have a bit more comfort, maybe 2 sets of cycling kit, we're still not, we're not exactly traveling in luxury here. So it's a case of anybody who wants to join, they're more than welcome.
Now, I've counted, and so far you've done 12 stages of this European tour over 12 years. So perhaps it was inevitable that the 13th was going to have problems, and obviously the problems that you've had this year are fairly obvious because of the coronavirus. You were planning to go from Lappeenranta in Finland to Trondheim, which I visited back in 2015 myself. Certainly recommend it. Obviously that's now being cancelled. So what are your plans? Are you planning on doing it later in the year? Are you going to wait until next year? And also, once you get to Trondheim, what's the next stage? How are you going to, presumably you want to continue so you loop it back to where you started, no?
Yeah, the plan was to head out at the end of May. So like you said, that's all been cancelled now, unfortunately. Everyone's got busy schedules. We've got young families and jobs to keep. So I suspect that instalments will probably be May next year now. That's the kind of muted idea that we've had. Whether we can fit something in later in the year, maybe September, October, be that some kind of trip to somewhere.
I haven't mentioned it to the wife yet.
Yeah, oops. I hope she's not listening. Yeah, it would be nice to do something. But yeah, certainly the grand plan is on hold until next year. The reason why we went Lappeenranta to Trondheim was so that we could take on the Trollstigen Pass. So that'll be the following year, which will be a route down through Trondheim, from Trondheim down through Norway, probably to the top of Denmark, and from there into the Benelux countries, and probably looping back then. If we can tie up with a loop somewhere, we haven't done Germany, we haven't done Switzerland.
If you come down through Denmark, you're better off just passing through Germany at that point before hitting Benelux countries. And Switzerland, if you follow the French-Swiss border, you can clip in there. I think the one point of debate is obviously you've got all the countries that we're trying to tick off, and we've just got that outlier of Portugal sitting out on the far end of the Iberian Peninsula. So So ultimately, we're going to have to end up heading down that way and finish there. Obviously, when you end up with a group of 10 people, you end up trying to decide things by committee, which never really works that well. And the question's already been posed: where do we go from there? And there's been suggestions of North Africa. My suggestion was a pedal craft across the Atlantic, and there's just all of these. You kind of, it's almost, if you want, a tacit admission by all of us that we don't really want it to end.
There's no reason why it should end. There's no reason why you just can't just keep on going until you're no longer capable of riding a bike.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, like
That's
I said,
where e-bikes comes in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, as I said all the way through, the one thing that's almost changed through the years is our ability to get it right, and the small lessons you learn as you go. Personally, being in a bike shop in Zagreb and having a guy laugh in my face because I mentioned Campagnolo, things like that, and we've just slowly learned the lessons of what to have with us and what to do and how to do it, and yeah, we're just getting good at it. So why don't we just keep going?
Are you aware of any other groups in Britain or elsewhere who've done similar kind of things?
We were riding there was another group riding on the other side of the road from us, and they had a trailer with them on the bikes, and they were doing a bit of a grand tour. I think they were German, but I'm not entirely sure.
They were. That was in Serbia or Hungary.
Right. Yeah, it rang a bell. I think when I say we're getting good at it, we're getting good at doing what we do. And there is no right way to do cycle touring. There's just whatever works for you and what you enjoy, really. I think we're still quite like this slightly slapdash Heath Robinson feel. We're off into the wide blue yonder, if you like, in our heads. Even though we've got our roots and very often accommodation booked, there's still always that, right, we get on the flight and that's it. We're gone from the support, if you like, of the world we know. And we are diving into that. And as I say, we haven't got anybody on speed dial to help us in the event of... And for me, that's part of the love of it, the fact that you're a little bit out of your depth, but like you say, you're reaffirmed by the kindness of people that you're not necessarily at risk. You're out your depth, but not at risk, and that's just a wonderful feeling.
That's a nice way to round off the conversation, is the fact that you make that point about, there's no right way to do a cycle tour. You just kind of do whatever you think is best for you. So, no, I think you found a brilliant way of doing it, a brilliant way of managing to tick off 29 countries, was it? Not everybody can do it in 5-6 weeks of a summer holiday. So, I take my hat off to you, and I think it's an inspiration for other people. So thank you for talking, and good luck when it comes to presumably 2021, when you head back to Finland in the direction of Norway and beyond.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks.